Rain had just stopped falling when David saw him, barefoot, drenched, and spinning in front of a woman's wheelchair beside the roadside. At first, David thought the man was mad. Lagos was full of people like that, men who had lost everything and danced for the wind. But then, something about the scene made him stop. The homeless man's movements were not wild or careless. They were graceful. Each step carried pain and joy at the same time, like someone dancing with memories only his heart could hear. And the woman in the wheelchair, she wasn't just watching. She was smiling. Her hands, frail and still, trembled slightly as if they wanted to clap. Her lips curved into the kind of smile David hadn't seen in years. The traffic light turned green, but David didn't move. Cars honked behind his black Range Rover, impatient Lagos drivers shouting insults. He didn't care. His eyes stayed fixed on the woman's face. Because that face belonged to his wife. "Amara?" he whispered, his voice shaking. The driver beside him blinked. "Sir." But David was no longer listening. He threw open the car door and ran out, his expensive shoes splashing into a puddle. The rainwater soaked his trousers as he rushed across the street, ignoring the horns and curses. The homeless man stopped dancing when he saw him coming. Amara's eyes widened, confusion flashing across her face. "David," she whispered. He froze in front of her. For a second, the whole world went silent. The traffic, the noise, the city. All he could hear was the sound of his own heartbeat. His wife, his Amara, the woman he thought had died 2 years ago in that terrible car accident. The same accident that had left him broken. The same accident that had taken everything good from his life. He reached for her trembling hand. It was cold but real. How is this possible?" he breathed. The homeless man stepped closer, his face wary. He was tall, lean, and dark-skinned, with a beard that looked like it hadn't seen a razor in years. His eyes, though tired, carried something David didn't expect: kindness. "She's been here for months," the man said softly. "The people around this area call her Mama Smile." David turned sharply. "Who are you?" "My name is Kola," he replied quietly. "I dance here every morning to make her laugh. She said it helps her forget the pain." David's mind spun. His wife, his missing wife, had been living among strangers in the heart of Lagos, cared for by a homeless man who danced to make her smile. He felt like the ground beneath him had disappeared. The doctors had told him her body was never found. The car had plunged into the river after the accident. They said it was impossible she survived. He had grieved, buried an empty coffin, and built walls around his heart. Now those walls were crashing down. "Amara," he said again, his voice breaking. "Why didn't you come home?" She looked at him with tears in her eyes. "Home," she whispered. "I don't remember home." Her words hit him like a hammer. Cola's voice was gentle. "She lost her memory, sir. I found her near the old bridge months ago. She couldn't walk. She couldn't remember who she was. I just stayed around to help." David felt his throat tighten. The billionaire who owned half of Lagos suddenly felt poorer than the man standing barefoot before him. He turned to Kola, his voice trembling. "You've been taking care of her?" Kola nodded. "As much as I can. I don't have much, but I make her laugh. Sometimes we eat, sometimes we don't, but she always smiles when I dance." Rain began to fall again, softly this time, as if the sky itself felt their pain. David's driver came running with an umbrella, but David didn't move. He stood there in the rain, staring at the man who had given his wife something he couldn't buy: joy. People had started gathering around, whispering. Some recognized David, the billionaire whose face often appeared in newspapers and magazines. But none of them understood what was really happening. David knelt down before his wife's wheelchair. "Amara," he said softly, "it's me, your husband. We used to live in Banana Island. You love gardenias and morning tea. You used to dance in the living room when it rained." Her eyes filled with tears. I don't remember," she whispered. "But your voice, it feels safe." Kola stepped back slowly, watching them. His heart ached, but he didn't move. He knew this day would come. He had seen the way people sometimes looked at Amara, like someone who belonged to another world. David lifted his wife gently into his arms, his tears mixing with the rain. He turned to Kola. "You saved her life," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "I can never repay you." Kola shook his head. "I didn't do it for reward, sir. I just didn't want her to be alone." For a long moment, the three of them stood there. One billionaire who had everything but love, one homeless man who had nothing but kindness, and one woman who had lost both her legs and her past. And somewhere deep inside, something shifted in David's heart. He realized money could rebuild houses, but it couldn't rebuild souls. And in that moment, under the Lagos rain, he knew his life was about to change forever. The hospital room smelled of disinfectant and rain-soaked air. Amara lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling. Machines hummed softly beside her. David sat near the window, his head in his hands. He had called every doctor he knew in Lagos, flown in specialists, and filled the room with nurses. But Amara's mind was still a fog of forgotten years. When she woke up the next morning, she looked around the room, her eyes wide. "Where's Kola?" she asked quietly. David lifted his head. "He's fine. I made sure he's taken care of." She blinked slowly. "He usually dances for me in the morning," she whispered. "That's how I start my day." Her words pierced his chest like a blade. He had spent years building companies and buying everything money could touch, but someone with nothing had given his wife something priceless. Later that day, David went to find Kola. He had arranged a hotel room for him, clean clothes, food, and money on the table. But when he entered the room, Kola was sitting on the edge of bed, still barefoot, his hands clasped together. "You didn't have to do all this," Kola said quietly. "I'm fine as I was." David looked at him for a long moment. "No, you're not. You've lived on the streets for years. You saved my wife's life. You gave her hope when I thought she was dead. I owe you everything." Kola smiled faintly. "Hope doesn't belong to anyone, sir. We just share it when we can." David sat beside him. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a billionaire. He felt like a man who was learning what life really meant. "Tell me," David said softly, "how did you find her?" Kola's eyes grew distant. "That night, it was raining hard. I was sleeping under the bridge near mile 2 when I heard something crash into the water. A car. I jumped in without thinking. I couldn't save the driver, but I found her floating close to the shore, barely breathing. I carried her out and begged some market women for help. The hospitals refused to take her because I looked like a madman, so I took her to the old women's shelter. When she woke up, she didn't remember anything. Not her name, not where she came from." He paused and smiled faintly, but she smiled when she saw me dance. So I kept dancing. That's all I could give her. David swallowed hard. His throat burned. He had spent millions on charity. Yet this homeless man had done more for one person than he ever had for thousands. "You risked your life for her," David said quietly. Kola shrugged. "She was someone's wife, someone's daughter. I couldn't leave her there." David looked away, blinking fast. "You'll never have to sleep under a bridge again. I'll make sure of it." Kola shook his head. "Sir, I'm not asking for that. I only want one thing. Let me see her dance again." David's chest tightened. Amara couldn't walk, let alone dance. But he nodded. "We'll make it happen." Weeks passed. The doctors confirmed Amara's memory loss was caused by trauma. They said it might return slowly or never. But David didn't care anymore. He was just grateful she was alive. Every evening, he wheeled her to the garden behind their mansion in Ikoyi. The same woman who once hosted charity balls and fashion galas now smiled at butterflies and children playing outside the gate. But sometimes when it rained, she'd hum a slow tune and ask softly, "Where's Kola? He hasn't danced today." David would smile gently. He'll come soon. He had kept his promise. He built a small dance studio in Surulere, and gave Cola a job there, teaching street kids how to dance. It became a home for children who had no one. Cola called it Dance for Tomorrow. One Sunday afternoon, David brought Amara there. The kids were laughing and clapping as Cola danced in the middle of the hall. Barefoot as always, but now in clean clothes, his smile wide and full of light. When Amara saw him, her eyes brightened. "Cola," she called out. He stopped mid-step and turned, surprise and joy flashing in his eyes. "Mama, smile," he shouted, using the name the streets had given her. The children cheered as he came to kneel beside her wheelchair. "You look different," he said with a grin. She laughed softly. "So, do you—" David watched them silently. Something in her face changed as she looked at Cola, the faint spark of memory returning. "You danced for me in the rain," she whispered. "You said laughter heals faster than medicine." Cola smiled. "And you said I danced like an old goat." Everyone laughed, even David. That night, when they got home, Amara asked David to take her to the garden. The moon was full, the air warm. She looked up at him and said quietly, "I remember something." David's heart stopped. "What do you remember?" "The night of the accident," she whispered. "I remember the car skidding, the water, then a man's hand pulling me out. I remember him dancing to keep me awake." Her eyes filled with tears. "It was Cola. He saved me." David knelt beside her and took her hand. "Yes," he said softly. "And now it's my turn to save him." She smiled faintly. "No, David. He doesn't need saving. Maybe we all do in different ways." He understood what she meant. Money had never filled the emptiness inside him, but kindness had begun to heal it. Months later, David and Amara opened a foundation. The Smile Again Trust, for people living on the streets, in honor of Cola. They made him the director. The story spread through Lagos like wildfire. The billionaire, the homeless dancer, and the paralyzed woman who found her way home. One evening, during the grand opening, Cola danced again, this time on a lit stage, not under the rain. Amara watched from her wheelchair, smiling through tears. When he finished, David stood and clapped, his voice full of pride. "This city will never forget you, Cola. You taught us that love doesn't need a mansion. It only needs a heart." The crowd cheered. Cola bowed deeply. And for the first time since the accident, Amara reached out her trembling hands, lifted herself slightly from the chair, and took one slow step toward him. The hall went silent. David rushed forward, but she waved him off, her face glowing. "Let me try," she whispered. One step, then another. Cola's eyes filled with tears. David covered his mouth, shaking. The woman who once lost everything was walking again, toward a man who saved her life, and the husband who found her again. When she reached them, she took both her hands and said, "Now let's dance." And under the lights of Lagos, with laughter echoing through the hall, the three of them danced, rich, poor, broken, healed, together, forever.